one of our members asked, is there burn-in time in paradigm speakers?
So it's a great question.
Yeah.
And really there's so many ways to answer this question, because if you look at it from an extreme perspective, well, if there's burn-in time, does that mean from the moment you start playing your speakers, there's a sweet spot and then it starts falling off the other side when things start wearing out? But I believe absolutely that after 200 to 300 hours, really most speakers, not just Paradigm. Let me think of another brand like Martin Logan, where burn-in time absolutely improves, because the electrostatic technology, when you're building a panel, of course, it is stretched over the frame, and it's a very tight fit that requires some break-in time. So absolutely, in my opinion, any speaker benefits from breakup time. When you think of warming up the crossover bits, when you think of the surrounds that are very stiff and new that have come out of the injection molding machine and placed on top of the cones, all of these need a little bit of time to work their way into position. So absolutely.
So 200 to 300?
I'm a fan of that 200 to 300 time.
Really? Wow.
And I've heard amplifiers that have sounded better once you get to that standpoint. I've had a lot of speakers in my home over the years, all ranges of Paradigm, many electrostatic speakers, some of the more conventional from Martin Logan as well. And there hasn't been a speaker that didn't benefit from a little time in my system. Even the electronics. We've had a lot of two-channel and multi-channel products that I have noticed changes for the benefit as you get more time in. And I happen to really love music, so there's always music playing. So lots of time for burn-in.
Well, what types of music do you like?
It's a great question, and it's probably one that I'd have the most difficulty answering, because being in our industry, we are exposed to so many genres, and I think, well, that's why I have such varying tastes. But if I think back to when I was a young kid and listening to Tom Petty and listening to the Cars and movie soundtrack from Beverly Hills Cop, you think of all of that music, and then somewhere in the background my mom's listening to Randy Travis and Zamfir, and then my dad would throw on some Bruce Springsteen. And I had an appreciation for all of it. I struggled with Zamfir, but everything I'll say love, and now I have 2 teenage sons, and they play a lot of sport, and they listen to a lot of hip hop. And I sometimes am challenged with their choices in music. It's tough, but then all of a sudden I'll be in the car and they'll be playing a track, and I'll go, hey, that's not bad, and I'll give my head a shake. But these are musical artists, and it's their interpretation of what they're looking at in the mirror in the window of life. It's funny, I had a conversation yesterday with Ron as we came into this. This is an amazing room we're sitting in, by the way. When we set up for shows, everybody in the industry knows you're given a room for setup, and it's not without its flaws. And no matter what you do, no matter how you treat the room, you're always having to work with the room. And so what you end up doing is you spend your days of setup not only getting the room to sound as good as you can, but finding the right music that fits that room the best with the characteristics. And so yesterday we started off listening to a little bit of Diana Krall, and we know where she sits. And then Ron played another track that just blew me away, and I've forgotten for the moment. I'll blame jet lag. But it just had some incredible deep bottom end bass, which these Persona 7Fs just love the deep bass. And then another track came on later, and I'm forgetting for a moment who she was, but very, very high vocals. And then a few songs later, there was a duet with very differing vocal capacities. And every single track sounded amazing in here. And it's the signature of a very well-balanced room. Because in a really bad room can have a dramatic effect on speakers. And this goes back, we can go down a whole other path about the room effect, and this is where we get into anthem room correction and taking away a lot of the bad things in a room, a lot of the very hard surfaces, a lot of the over padded areas, heavy rugs and carpets. All of these either suck the life out of a speaker, or they can make it very hot and sharp and create a lot of spikes and valleys.
So do you think that DSP is the future of audio in general?
Oh, absolutely. I think if to me, anything that you can do to provide that neutrality of what the speaker's trying to do. The speaker's doing its job, especially a good speaker.
Yeah.
Everything else is trying to change that. So the more that you can do to have that neutrality of the speaker, to take out the effects of the room, that's why we have treatments, so that you can really control the reflections within the room.
Exactly.
So you take a rock and you drop it into a water and the ripples that go out. Well, eventually the ripples hit the end, and where do they go? They don't just dissipate. They start working their way back in.
Exactly.
And that's the same thing that happens with the audio signals. It hits the wall, it reverberates.
Right.
And so you have your direct creating first reflection, and then next reflection,
Right.
and the timing at which it comes to your ear.
It makes your brain to work really, really hard.
That's right. That's right. And here's where we pick up on what we consider distortion. And so if we can treat a lot of those secondary reflections, it can improve the experience.
Where are you originally from?
I was born in Belleville, Ontario, so it's about 2.5, 3 hours away from the Toronto area, east.
Okay.
Yeah, so I've lived in Ontario my entire life.
Yeah.
And I've traveled for university, and I was brought back to the Toronto area by Scott Bagby and Bill Vandermeerle when an opportunity came for me to join the company.
Where did you go for the school?
It's a funny story. So I was always involved in sport growing up.
Hockey?
I played a lot of hockey. My boys play a lot of hockey. It seems to be a bit of a Canadian pastime.
Right. Is it?
Oh my goodness. So I was always involved in sport, and so it was an easy decision to me to go into a sport-related education. So in my post years of university, I was still focused on looking down a career path, possibly into sports injuries management, pediatric sports injuries. I was a kid that had a lot of injuries, and I had a lot of respect for the people in that field that could heal me. So I thought if I could be like that. But it's interesting how paths can change. I developed a bit of a sickness for golf, and I ended up playing a lot of golf, and my work in the volunteer field and the certification field that was supposed to be going towards my secondary degree ended up turning into about an 80 to 90 round golf habit per year. I got caught up in the golf industry, which I loved. It was still very much sport oriented, and that's the funny story that I got a call out of the blue one day from Scott Bagby, who we had a mutual friend, and he wanted to just have a conversation. And it was around that time that in the early 2000s that Bill Vandermeerle, who'd done a great job expanding our brand from Canada into the U.S., he was now looking outside of the U.S. and the international world, which we really hadn't done a lot of work, because for Scott and Jerry, they wanted to make sure they were looking after their backyard. So had a conversation, and really their goal was to bring somebody in that would help them build the brand outside of Canada and the USA. And it was interesting. I'd been again, I always hesitate to say audiophile, but
What does distinguish audiophile?
I think sometimes audiophiles get a bit of a bad rap, right? And I think it goes to the extreme of audiophiles being very specific in their tastes and being very judgy, and I don't like this,
With
and
the
I'm
sonic
critical.
characteristics?
Precisely, and I just think anybody in my world can be an audiophile if they really enjoy music. So to me, being an enthusiast, I love music. I love music in movies, and just all around have music playing as often as I can. And so it was the same in high school, in university. As soon as I had a little bit of spare money from my jobs, I went out and I bought my first pair of Paradigms just before university. So it's strange that my first real set of hi-fi speakers was a pair of Paradigms. 9SC MK3s. I still remember them. And I had them for years and years and years. In fact, I still had them when Bill hired me, and of course told him in conversation. He said, "Well, I think we're going to have to send you home with something a little more current." And that day, I picked up a pair of Studio 60 V3s. an AVM and an MCA amplifier.
Uh-huh.
And I came home and it was just like a kid at Christmas. There I was, my vehicle with boxes sticking out of them, lugging them into the house, and the obsession continued from there. And over the years I've had just about every speaker you can imagine in and out of the house.